Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Connect L&D webinar on opportunities for organization learning in new normal. I'm Satyakshi from SpringPeople. We are India's largest enterprise training provider. I will be your moderator for today's session. In today's webinar, we have our expert Nishath Usmani, Director, Leadership Development KPMG. With 18 plus years of experience in a variety of fields, learning strategy, talent management, coaching, and communication management, to name a few. Nishad has held key roles such as Curriculum Director, Capgemini, and L&D Leader, Strategy, and Ops, Deloitte. She is an associate certified coach from ICF and is currently pursuing her PhD in HR management. So in today's webinar, Nishad will talk to us about the paradigm shift and technology enablement in the L&D sphere due to the ongoing pandemic. She will throw light on what to expect in the new normal, its associated challenges and opportunities, and finally, how all you L&D professionals as key enablers can help create a new culture of learning in light of this paradigm shift. If you have any questions during the session, please type it in the chat box and they will be addressed by Nishad after the presentation is over. So without further ado, let's start today's session. Over to you, Nishad.
Fantastic. Thank you, Satyakshi. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, your voice is fine.
Super. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Organization Learning in the New Normal. I'm Nishath. Thank you for this opportunity. Really, I'm very happy today to be talking about this topic because, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with my children last night. And over dinner, I was telling them that, I'm going to be talking about learning in the new normal. And my youngest daughter, Nazish, she says, Ma, that's really interesting because in my wildest of dreams, I would never have thought that I can be at home munching on sandwich and learning ratio and proportion at the dining table. So really, these are very new and exciting times. And I invite you all to see this perspective. In fact, I'm even more, I'd say, fortunate to be talking to, in fact, my own fraternity. So many people on this call are perhaps people from learning and the talent development space. So really, these are exciting times for us. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that. Just there. So why am I saying that these are exciting times for HR? Yeah. First, I think these are we are all in a bit of a emotional roller coaster of sorts. Yeah. The virus has made us believe that no one is safe unless everyone is safe. Yeah. So things like care, forgiveness, empathy, these are the most important topics in our business today. But these words were never there earlier, and they have now entered our dictionary, and it's now so important that, like never before. Learning, secondly, I say learning is the center of HR. In many ways, I call it the renaissance of learning. So much like how the renaissance of the 15th century marked the revival of arts, culture, logic. It was a movement that was happening. It was there. But something about the Renaissance served as a tipping point, and things changed completely. The whole of Europe was embraced with that. So much like that, this crisis has brought about a renaissance of learning, and that's great news for learning professionals like us. Not just because we are in this business, but learning is something that is so integral to human nature, and apart from being something that's extremely positive. So this pandemic has actually caused the learning market to become super healthy, first of all, and then a sort of a business transformation of sorts, where companies are more and more eager to spend on workforce development at one end, and so are the employees. Just as much as the organization is moving people towards doing more learning, the employees at their end are also just as interested. Uh, and in fact, in a bit, I will share with you that we've also been speaking to, at the KPMG Academy, we've also been speaking to HR heads, learning heads from different industries, and across the board, the fact that learning has become front and center has echoed. The third reason why I say that is because HR tech per se is transforming. Yeah? In most times of recessions, the tech industry kind of takes a pause, yeah? But not this time. In fact, people are consuming the whole digital experience like never before. So companies like ServiceNow, IBM, TCS, they have already built, and they're looking at what we call the back to work tool sets. Yeah? And employee experience has become very important with companies like Qualtrics and Glint, who are all the time have created tools which help organizations to get the feedback in real time. So HR tech is transforming. And then the final point is that this whole thing has created a new awareness around the individual. The focus now is more on wholesome leadership, overall development, rather than just productivity. And therefore, people have become more tuned to listening to these aspects of individual development. So you see how the flavor in many ways is changing to a more humane and a more complete way of looking at professionals at large. So for us in HR, this is really an interesting time. You know, for years, people have spoken about this future of work, yeah, and many of us on this call also may have written and spoken about it. But I think it's here. The future of work is already here. It's unfortunate that it took a pandemic for us to realize that that at the center of it, really, it's about hiring the right people, giving them the right culture, giving them the tools to succeed, creating a learning experience that's valuable for them, and then uh, making them work towards their fulfillment and their goals and mission. Yeah. So, to summarize, this is an exciting time because a lot of things that we up till now did not consider as being very core to business and employee development have come now and taken center stage. From there on, having spoken to you about my excitement and happiness, let me tell you what we're going to be covering in the next 20 minutes or so, after which we will pause for questions and your comments. Very eagerly look forward to. Here's what we're going to be doing. We've already seen why these are exciting times. We'll then get into what is organization learning. There is a lot of ambiguity on what is really this term called organization learning all about. So we look a little bit, dig into research and see what we are hearing from there. Then we look at what does reimagining the organization learning function really mean? Yeah? What is changing, and therefore what are we seeing going forward? And then finally, you know, I've often felt that when I'm listening to a webinar or when I'm attending something, what really helps me is what does it mean for me? Yeah, what does it mean for the learning professional to now going forward? And I hope to leave you with a few thoughts on what it means for all of us. Okay, so that's the overall agenda. Yeah. Before we dive in, just a couple of thoughts on whenever we talk about the new normal or the future. Yeah, there is a bit of a skeptic in me that gets up. So, like Niels Bohr said, prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. Especially if it's about the future. And then Albert Einstein said, I never think of the future, it comes soon enough. That said, the good old Voltaire said, it is said that the present is pregnant with the future. The point, everyone, I'm making is that no one really knows about where this will go, including the speaker on this call. Yeah. But in Voltaire's quote here, you see that indeed there is something about the future that we are already seeing. For those of you who saw my LinkedIn post this morning, I said we are all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. So what does that mean? It means perhaps that some of us know a little bit more from in what's going to be happening by the virtue of the ecosystems that they are in or the conversations that they're fortunate to have. And in the session, I want to share that with you. By no means is this the only answer, or not even the perfect answer. So what I would really encourage you to do as you listen to me is ask yourself, if this makes sense. Because the more questions you have, the more I have left you with things to think about. What will be rather unfortunate is if you have a lukewarm response, which I hope you will not have. Really violently agree or violently disagree with the points being made here, and take with you what you think is best. Yeah? So just I thought a caveat that I must mention, especially when one is thinking about and predicting what the new normal is going to be like. Okay, so let's look a little bit, like I said, on the definition of organization learning. We cannot talk about organization learning without talking about Peter Senge. Yeah, way back in 1990, his book *The Fifth Discipline* is where he spoke about what are the things that come together to make a learning organization. He said there are 5 disciplines. The first one, team learning. Yeah. Here is where there is emphasis on learning activities of the group. The second is what he called shared visions. This is the ability to unearth, pictures of the future. So organizations which are able to mobilize people towards those shared visions constitute good learning organizations. Yeah. They are the ones who foster genuine commitment and enrollment, really. So therefore a vision, not a compliance. The third aspect of learning organizations, said Peter, was what we call the mental models. Yeah? These are the deeply held internal images of how the world works, and these are individual images. Yeah? And therefore people start to believe that this is the way they're going to get impacted post a training. That becomes their mental model. And then he spoke of personal mastery. Yeah, this is the whole deepening of the personal vision, and really sort of saying that doing this learning or a learning organization enables more of personal mastery, and that became his fourth discipline aspect of organization learning. And the fifth one, which is what he calls system thinking, which is the ability to see interrelationships rather than very linear cause-effect relationships. He famously said that if you cut a cow into 2, they don't become 2 cows. Yeah? You have to be able to see the whole system together. And this system thinking is what constitutes a great learning organization. Yeah. Now, while this was a great idea, and Sanjay was very much appreciated because it was way back in 1990, it was a very ambiguous term, organization learning, but it wasn't very clear what it meant. And while these principles were great guidelines in looking at organization learning, they failed to identify very observable characteristics. Yeah? So people did more research, and then what we call the second perspective on this one, which is by Pedler, Bourguignon, and Boydell, who came in 1991. And they defined organizations that facilitates the learning of all of its members. Just one sec, just let me move this away for everyone's benefit. An organization that facilitates the learning of all of its members and continuously transforms itself to reach strategic goals. They defined organization learning like that, and they said it constitutes of 11 areas. Essentially they spoke about the learning approach to strategy and the self-development of each person, participative policy making, learning climate, just to name a few. So this perspective was more comprehensive than Peter's. Yeah? And therefore the whole idea of the traditional elements of management were incorporated in this theory. But what it failed to do was that if learning is really consisting of 11 different dimensions, it became a bit too comprehensive for people to take in. And then came what we call the strategic perspective. In the strategic perspective, the definition became a little bit more crisp to say an organization that is skilled at creating, acquiring, and transferring knowledge and modifying its behavior to reflect new knowledge and insights. I think this little bit of a historical view of learning is very valuable, because you see now, in sometimes many of our organizations are still stuck in the earlier times. Yeah? And if you see these definitions, you realize that actually, using a more contemporary definition really helps us up our understanding of what organization learning is about. So therefore, I'm still on the strategic perspective, which really emphasizes on the macro level, yeah? And continues to say that it is the change in the behavior that makes the difference. Then came the integrative perspective. This is what Watkins and Marsh spoke about in 1993. Yeah, and the integrated model really then said that learning it's about continuously transforming yourself. Yeah, it's a continuous, strategically used process integrated with running parallel to work. This is what happens when we intentionally look at learning being part of the business strategy. Yeah. And Watkins and Marsh then went on to develop what we call the DLOQ, which is Dimensions of Learning Organization Quotient, which is a very good tool. It's available freely on the net. I would invite you to take a look at that, because from there on they went to build a tool which helps you measure your learning organization's level of maturity, or what the things that you need to put in place to be, or the tools or the mechanisms that you need to put in place. But what is interesting about this definition, I feel, is this way back in '96, they said learning is continuous and it is integrated and running parallel to work. Very recently, Josh Bersin spoke about how learning in the flow of work. But this is something that has been there for some time, where we have seen scholars have talked about learning being more integrated with the workflow itself and not being separate. There are several organizations who've got this right. Yeah? Some of the famous ones, if I may say, General Electric, their whole Crottonville Learning Center was based on this whole idea that the managers come, they teach, and they come in not just as learners, but to develop a whole next set of mentorship through what they call the teachers, leaders teaching teachers, leaders as teachers idea, and that really flourished because the mentoring in the organization went up significantly. Goldman Sachs, yeah, it's another example of their Pine Street Learning Center, for example. It provides a whole lot of essential things that really cater to this managerial population that comes to the organization all the time. So everyone, just to summarize, organization learning really is something that has been very intrinsic to both our business strategy and individual performance. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to see it that way for a long time, yeah? And there are a variety of factors about that. But if you just look at the flow of learning, this is something or the evolution of organization learning, you will see this. I'm just pausing for a second just to see if there are any questions that are coming up. I can't see questions, but I'm assuming that's because Satyakshi said that the questions will be at the end. But feel free to populate that Q&A box as we go along, because I think the question is best asked when you have it in your mind. So please do that. Okay, we now move on to what I'm calling the reimagining of learning going forward, and what does this mean? Hold on. Okay, and when I say reimagining of the learning organization, what I'm saying is that Actually, don't let me say something. Let me tell you a story. Yeah. So this is the story of a CEO of leading. By the way, these are real stories, but names obviously are not there. So this is the CEO of a leading marketing company. Yeah. And he practically rubbed his eyes in disbelief. Yeah. Why? Because he couldn't believe the sales training report that was in front of him. In the last 3 months, the number of distributors who accessed the product learning program on his portal had multiplied 3 times. 3 times, yeah. The distributors from remote places were signing up to do the training, and they were ready to go online for a class at 9 p.m. in the evening because it just meant that they had to move from the uh, drawing room to a quieter place. Now, this is what our imaginary CEO, but who's actually a person. Let's call him Mohan for now. Mohan had really earnestly wished for this a few months ago, but today it's a reality. I want to cut to Tarana's world. Now, Tarana is the head of a large IT technology and outsourcing firm. In her world, online learning is the norm. Yeah, that's no big deal. And yet, she witnessed something that she hadn't seen earlier. More people in her organization were buying programs. So this is an organization that you have to kind of buy a program, not just get enrolled naturally. So they were buying programs, they were spending more time on learning, and they were interested in newer and wider variety of subjects. And there's another large IT conglomerate who actually did a study on how much time people were now spending on learning. And they found that on an average, and this is a big company, on an average, each employee was spending about 45 minutes on learning now. And this is pure e-learning. Yeah? And that's 15 minutes more than the average ever that they had seen. So clearly there is a lot that is happening in this world of learning, and that's why I said, if you remember in the initial point, that this is really the renaissance of learning. So what are the things? And I believe there are 5 things, and I'm going to take you through each of them as we go along. So number 1 is what I call the digitization of learning. This is digitization on steroids, really. Yeah. There is a report by Technovia. This is a report I got, which is a leading global technology research firm, and it says that the market for online learning is expected to grow to USD 12.48 billion between 20 and 24. And COVID-19 is going to have a significant impact on these numbers, especially in the first quarter. Yeah. The e-learning market is also expected to increase. It's expected that it's going to triple to 325 billion by 2025. So what's clearly happened is that there is the whole, and this is just what I gave you figures for are just the e-learning numbers and the online learning, but even the fact that people have moved to outside the classroom, the definition of the classroom itself has changed radically, is something that we are seeing very much today. People are now more open to learning through videos. They're more open to just going on and seeing a simple PDF and understanding it more. The best example, learning doesn't have to be perfect anymore. Best example I would say is Khan Academy. Again, a perfect case of, it's not fancy, there are no whistles and bells, but it's just learning that gets delivered to you in its most applicable way. Yeah, so the whole digitization on steroids has happened in this period. Yeah. The second big thing is this whole thing around well-being taking center stage. Yeah. In so many ways, I think this is so interesting because the learning agenda, yeah, that itself has transformed and made such interesting leaps. Yeah. Companies are teaching yoga and group exercises, and there is a chef who's teaching you cooking classes. In my own organization, there were several sessions that happen on every day on learning and dance and mindfulness. Yeah. There were organizations which have something called the happiness challenge, where people were competing with each other to see how the whole work from home was working out for them. And there were lots of virtual sundowners and parties to talk, where people would perform and dance. And so while that was in the well-being agenda so far, it's meant a lot of it has creeped into the learning aspect as well. Yeah. So to that extent, learning itself, the learning agenda itself has changed. Yeah. I'm moving on, and there's if you know Nick Van Dam, who was an ex-McKinsey partner, and then one of the best CLOs one knows. He says that there's something very interesting about learning, in the sense that if you look at, and I'm quoting him here, he says, if you look at all the studies on happiness, there are three things that make people happy. Yeah. One relates to people continuing to grow. Yeah. Another relates to people having social relationships, spending time with family. And the third is about having meaning and purpose in life. And if you think about it, learning plays a role in all of these things. So, the learning agenda, to my earlier point, about how it's changing is becoming key. The third point, thriving in the virtual world. Uh, for the longest time, there were what I would, most organizations would call the soft skills and the hard skills, right? And there was there seemed to be a very clear categorization between the two. But of course, that some things are absolutely relevant. Engineers need to do the coding. We definitely need technical people to fix the right stuff. That's not the question. But really, what we're saying is that the future skills are going to be more behavioral. They are going to be things things like empathy, emotional intelligence, uh, communication with an element of persuasion. So organizations are waking up to the reality that the virtual world will see a rise of a new set of learning agenda, and which is required for us to be able to thrive in this new era. Uh, then learning in a new avatar, yeah, and I call it avatar because it's now no, it's a lot like what we call a learning a Netflix kind of a platform, yeah, where you must be able to download stuff, you get it on demand. There is just-in-time learning, there is learning for the sake of learning, there is learning for the job, there is learning for knowledge. There the learning variety itself is now going to be seen in so many different ways, because people are going to consume it very differently. So learning takes a new avatar. And the final point I want to make here is about how the collaborative tools like MS Teams, Zoom, etc., are now making us rethink about what is happening with what potential we have where learning is concerned. MS Teams can store conversations for up to 2 years. Yeah. The Zoom and the ease with which one can log into a Zoom session has made it so much easier. It's almost like dialing into a call. And these collaborative tools have entered into the world of learning. In fact, we are designing a program where you cannot see learning in the absence of collaboration, because they both are so close to each other, and they both synergistically contribute to your overall learning. So collaboration, learning, networking is all coming together to create a very different dimension than what we know of the classroom, of the typical classroom, where people would come in and there would be a set agenda. Collaboration really means it's more fluid. Things are happening on the go. Facilitators take the role of people who really want to create that environment for learning. If you remember what Socrates spoke about, right, where he said, the whole Socratic discussion. I know many of my L&D folks are on this call, so I won't get into details. But the Socratic discussion, the point that there is learning doesn't have to be one way, and people come to the class already with an awareness and a knowledge, and what the class or what the the space of the learning space really does is to bring that knowledge to the fore. So if you just put all of these 5 together, yeah, you will see a different way of defining organization learning in itself. Yeah. The whole competency discussion, the whole, this is what I need to know and therefore I will learn. Yeah. This is how I need to learn. All of that is going through a fairly big churn. And the future then is really made up of how we bring all this together for which is for the enterprise's benefit, because that's really the reason why learning organizations exist. I'm taking a pause and I'm just looking for questions which are not there yet, and that's fine. But so everyone, this is the shift that one is seeing. But so what? Yeah, where do we go from here? And I'm going to be spending the next 5 to 10 minutes talking about what happens from here on. Yeah. The very first thing, yeah, change for the better. Yeah. What we're saying here, and again, I'm going back to the several conversations that we've had both internally at KPMG and externally. Everyone is saying we are not going back. This means that people are now relooking at the classroom. They are saying that if we need to bring people together, it has to be for a very specific purpose, way beyond what we saw earlier. It also means then that organizations will have to be more mindful about how they create learning programs. They will have to be more stringent with the outcomes that they're expecting, and therefore it puts a whole lot of pressure on learning. I don't believe anyone on this call belongs to that category of learning professionals who believe that learning programs were great learning events where people just came and ate and went. But even if there are, those days are gone. Now, more than ever before, people are going to ask if do we need to get them in the room? Do we need to fly them over? If not, can we do it online? And wait a minute, it doesn't get easy from there. If we do it online, what's the best way to do it? It's certainly not just taking the same program and cutting it into parts, but what are we going to be doing about making it an extremely enriching experience? We at the KPMG Academy, in fact, are creating a program on that. So happy to take that later. But the online experience has to be a one that is enriching and just as good, if not better, than going to a physical classroom. Now, you may say that that's not possible because man is a social animal, said Aristotle. Indeed, but the question is, if you bring them together, what is the intentionality behind it? And when they are learning online, what's the best experience you can offer? So if we are not, so clearly we are not going back. And when we are not going back, we are looking, when we go back, the whole dynamics will be very different. Yeah. So that's my first point on what does this mean for learning professionals. The second, we need to now use the science of learning. Yeah. Now, what does science of learning mean? When we moved from this whole online to offline version, yeah, we need to rethink about what is it that the physical setup offered, and then develop what we do need to do online. Essentially, it's really about saying, it's not about saying what can technology offer and then can I just fit it there. It's about going back to the basics, which is about the learner insights. Now that's very simple, right? But you need to be able to now more intentionally ask, how do learners perceive this knowledge and how do they process the information? These are simple. This is just the science of learning. Yeah? And really saying that if technology should be able to adopt all of this and ensure that the processes of like learning accumulation, understanding knowledge, in processing the information, technology should be able to help you do that. Yeah. One such example I've often found is that just pausing for a second. One such thing I have seen very often being used is polls, but again, polls is another thing that I feel can very easily go haywire. Yeah, I'm getting a message saying the network is bad. Satyakshi, I'm going to lean on you to tell me if it's not okay. Yeah, otherwise I'm just going to
I can
continue.
hear you. I can hear you.
Sure. Okay. So sure. So what polls and any other interactive tools can do is create the hooks for learning. Now, what do we mean by hooks? For example, a poll can be a great reason for you to start a discussion. Yeah, to get into this whole thing about appreciative inquiry. There's a professor at Bentley University who says that what you need to do in these sessions now is what he calls create the topical pastures, yeah, which is where you let people come together, discuss things, and just go off for a little bit, but not very long. These cannot be longer discussions, but you bring them back early enough and create a learning, create more hooks for learning that way. Yeah? And what you may well use your poll for is to see how people went up before they went back into these what he calls the pastures or the grazing pastures. Before they went over there, what was the learning then, and then after they came back, what was the learning? So the whole idea of using these things that you ask people, you let them ideate and think, you let them be for some time, and then bring them back and measure. Yeah. Now this goes back to the science of learning. Yeah? Because really the science of learning principles will become very, very critical, and how you incorporate them in a thought-provoking way, using visual stimuli, using stuff that will, for example, you throw up a picture, you ask people to respond, you're making them think in a far more involved manner than you would if you just had some things on the PowerPoint. Yeah, so using the science of learning is a great idea. And when we do this, one of the things we may want to think about is how the whole newspaper industry, when it went online, there's some fantastic case studies over there about how they rethought. They said a newspaper is something that has to be physical, right? But how did they get into online? How did they then monetize it, right? And today, we are very comfortable with reading something online. So how did they convince the advertiser? How did they convince the reader? And then bring quality content, and then of course pay their writers enough so that quality content came to people. So that's a great example. I think that's the other thing that will happen now. We will increasingly borrow from other industries very different from ours to learn more, because they may be at a different learning curve to that extent. The third the point is the fact that the definitions are going to become blurred between the learner and the teacher. Now, this calls for a very different dynamic to be observed. What it means is that no longer the concept of the teacher being on the stage is going to move away, and the whole collaborative workspace will mean that learning is no longer one-dimensional. There will be more what I call the democratization of learning, and more people and people can just contribute. They can chime in. They don't have to be an expert, but there are people who are experts in that specific area, and they bring all those learnings to what you call the learning hub or the learning marketplace. One very interesting example I saw was about in these lockdown times, about how to cut your hair. And there are videos and videos, and some of them so fantastic, really, about how you can you can get a haircut just sitting at home. But who are these people? These are people who are just like you and me, who have now discovered ways to cut hair better. And there you are, the learner and the teacher all come together in this one model of what we call the marketplace. Yeah. So the whole concept of the centralized model becomes very, very decentralized. And we then what that happens is there's user generated content, and therefore the role of the learning person then becomes that of a master facilitator, or what in research we call meta analytics. But kind of just bringing all of this together, making meaning, helping people create meaning, will be the definition of the new learning professional. And yeah, and finally, communicating for impact. Learning professionals will need to now wake up to this reality of communication playing a very unique role. Now, I'm not saying that learning was never important, communication was never important, but today you're now competing with the person's time to maybe take care of household things, or to watch Netflix, or to go to hundreds and thousands of other places where he or she can consume learning. So your communication then therefore has to be almost persuasive, to the point of being like a marketeer's voice. It is no longer going to be about compliance or about making or coercing people to do something. It will have to be a very powerful communication that appeals to the individual psychology, and it will be that will make a difference in either wanting, in influencing people to learn or to drop and go elsewhere. And therefore, the role of communication will become central to that of a learning professional. I am going to take a pause at this point, but what I wanted to convey here on this slide is really, therefore, what is those are the four essential things that we will have to keep at front and center as learning folks to be able to navigate into the future. Yeah. Like I said, I'm going to take a quick pause and see questions, comments, suggestions. Satyakshi, it's over to you for the moment.
Yeah, okay, sure. Thank you, Nishath, for your invaluable insights on organizational learning opportunities during these unprecedented times. I'm sure all professionals here will take away some very key learnings and insights from your past experiences you have shared with us today. And in fact, you are still working on that part. Okay, now we will open the forum for Nishad to answer the questions that we have received during the presentation. So Nishad, you can go ahead and answer all the questions. You were very eager to answer the questions. You'll have all the questions now. Can you see the questions in your chat box?
I can't.
Uh,
Yeah.
just
Okay.
check.
Yes. Now I see. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
You can see.
Superb. Yeah. Okay. So, how do you? There's one question. How do you connect organization learning to be holistically implemented for L&D professionals in this new normal? I think that's the end of the question, right? Yeah. That's partly what I covered in through my talk. But what I'm saying is that first you have to start by looking at how the learning agenda has changed, and number one. Number two, how the learner has changed, and how some of the dynamics at the business end have changed. uh, Many organizations are now forced to, for example, work from home, but that's an easier thing to ask me. But in many organizations, the whole uh, business setup has turned virtual. For example, what about sales organizations? Right now, they have to do all the learning, all the selling virtually. And what that means is that their learning, the whole dynamics of their model have changed, and therefore learning has to follow that. And holistic learning agenda or a learning program will follow business naturally, and keeping the stakeholders and the business agenda at the center, you should be able to create a program that makes business sense.
Nishat, you can see the link on right side. You can pop out then you can see all the questions.
All right. Okay. This one.
On right side there's a
But pop.
rectangle, then there is a diagonal. Yeah, you have to click on that, and then you can see all the questions. Around 10 to 15 questions are there.
Oh wow. Oh, so I'm sorry about this. I'm not able to figure out where the questions, where that thing is, you're talking about this. Ah, okay, super. Thank you. Great, great, great. Okay. Could you simplify the process of creating, retaining, and transferring knowledge? This is what's the core of learning. And the answer to that is a little bit in what I spoke about, the science of learning, to see what is it, how are your learners learning the best, what modes work for them. And I think the other very important aspect of ensuring that the retaining and transferring happens is looking at the larger ecosystem. Many times what happens is that if learning happens in isolation, it never rarely sticks. I'll give you an example. In my organization, we created a program where with a very clear need or that individuals had. The need was so clearly articulated that then the program was we got stupendous success, because at the very core, the learner need which was in this case a better role and a better an advancement in the career, was so clearly articulated that what we did from there on was very easy. So I would say, apart from the science of learning, I think it's also about looking at the ecosystem, the whole managerial support that they're getting, the rewards and recognitions that they have, the role of innovation in all of this, the role of failure and their ability to embrace failure if when they go and apply the learning. The organizations and the managers' ability to let you fail and succeed. I think all of these play a very key role in making that process happen. What's the best OD strategy for small-scaled owner-driven cultures? Oh, this is a fantastic conversation to have, and Priyanka, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. But for the dynamics at a startup or a owner-driven organization are very different. More agility is required. What is relevant today may not be relevant for the organization 1 month later. So how do you create rapid agile programs which have elements of both learning and mentorship, because that's a larger role that learning must play, will be key. So this is an OD strategy at place here. Hi Nishath, this is Ram. Hello Ram. I know you without you have to say ex-Capgemini. I agree with you on the first slide where you showcased that these are exciting times. But hasn't the pandemic also impacted company bottom lines? Where is the money to reimagine organizational learning? Fantastic. No, that is the dichotomy that we are seeing, Ram. In fact, that while at one end the wallets may be temporarily empty or not looking good, organizations are realizing that this is what they need to be able to move up. I'll tell you, for example, in my organization, the whole learning uptake went up by 3 times in these 3 months as compared to all of last year. Not just the numbers, we experimented with newer types of learning. We experimented with a whole set of leaders and practitioners who are typically not part of our learning audience, who now came in and delivered lectures and also became party to the lectures. So actually it got reimagined in ways that were not conventional, and those that don't require money. So to answer your question, if the bottom lines have shrunk, as you're essentially saying is that there's no money. But I'm saying the learning need is there, which is a far bigger business case than to be able to have the monies. Like Nietzsche says, right? The one who has a what will find the how. So we clearly found the what. So then how, which is how do we make it happen, became a matter of format. So I would disagree with you there that there was immense opportunity to organizational learning. Someone says I missed the story, but I'm sorry, these are not. I'm sure when you hear the recording again, you can hear it. Can you repeat the 3 things for happiness? Okay, so this is Nick Van Dam's stories, reasons why he said that learning was very key. Ahmed, yeah, and so like I said, he says that learning is one thing that helps you what are the three things that bring you happiness? So one is that people are able to continually build good relationships. They are able to have meaning and purpose in life, and the third, that they're able to grow. Now, all these things are very directly related to learning. So this is what. This is how he connected learning to happiness, and learning has a role to play in all of these, is what he was saying. Once we get to normal times post the pandemic, would the classroom training take a back seat? Shilpa, that's the answer is yes and no. It will take a back seat because now organizations will realize that maybe we don't need to have people congregate in one place. In many ways, you know, the classroom is perhaps one thing that hasn't changed in hundreds of years. So now the concept of the classroom will 100% undergo a change. Will it take a back seat? Now that's a more difficult question to answer. But I definitely think that it will not be that will be the first option for learning professionals to go to. It will be something that will come as an aid. Just like sometimes online will come as an aid, classroom will come as an aid, but not the go-to way for things. And it also really depends on how well we use these times. Yeah, that's the other thing. If we create online programs which are just a big bore, which are, you know, just one click after the other, unidimensional, folks that where people have zoned out, they're looking at WhatsApp, then yes, absolutely, the business case for classroom will be there. But if we create a program which is just as engaging and just as informative, then the question will come up as to why classroom. And you know, that's it's a very exciting part. It suddenly will mean that somebody sitting in Zimbabwe will be able to share what he has learned on a particular thing, and we don't have to go there, and he doesn't have to come here. It just becomes online, and therefore the need for the classroom itself changes. Okay, there are a lot of questions. We understand that the medium for learning is shifting to virtual learning from a classroom mode. However, do you think learners are ready for the shift? I think I just sort of answered that it depends on how good a program you make of it. Again, just going back to some case studies and / experiments in my own organization. Typically, our leader population is very is the most difficult to have in programs, simply because the virtue of the work that they're doing and they're constantly on the run. But during this time, we created a format where it was possible for them to log in for a short period of time, get quality learning, and really find. And then we followed it up with takeaways that went to them before and after. Of course, recordings which were made available. So all of this suddenly made it like it was they were ready to do the shift. Now I'm sure they're going to ask, if I need to come to a classroom, why can't we not do it that way? Because that way was just as good. So it's really about that. So is the physical classroom a thing of the past? I answered that. What all can we do to foster a culture of enabling online self-learning? This is a long answer, but I'm just going to give you three things. One, if you see learning as if you see online learning in a larger context of learning in the flow of work, or learning as you work, you suddenly realize that you don't have to just create a program for them, for the learner. It's about saying, you know, if you need to know more about this, it's here. If you need to know more about how to do this, contact, you know, ABCDE, who are mentors or at least role models in this area. Yeah? Should you need to know more about a specific topic, join this class. When you create these different experiences for people, they suddenly see a world that is different from how they perceive learning. And that way, it's really about the cultural shift. Again, I'll give you an example. In my organization, we ran this graduation program, which had like 80 plus people on the call with all of the leaders, and everyone said, you know what, it's so, how can you do it virtually? It just doesn't make sense. But the way we engaged everyone, the way you run that program, you know, with constant feedback, which is very key. People miss that on an online session. The way we ensured that people remained engaged, all of that has contributed. Once again, I'm repeating myself here, but it has contributed a lot to bringing a mind shift which wasn't there earlier. I'm mindful of time. There are just 5 minutes to go, but there are many more questions I see here. Could you share concrete examples of organizations that have implemented these? I'm going to pick, again, I would request you to reach out on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to take these questions, but I'm just going to move to what is the best OD strategy for small scaled or driven culture. I think I answered that, Priyanka's question. Satyakshi, if there's one particular question that you want me to answer, because I'm just aware there is 5 minutes to go and I want to give it back to you before we close.
Yeah, you can choose any one which you feel it will be very good and relevant to our this audience this time. Just last
Sure.
one question you can pick.
Okay. 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 How will you measure the outcome from online learning? Let me just pick that. Simply because that's one question that we were even traditionally asked even earlier. What is the impact of the learning program? Ranjit, in fact, digital learning makes it easier for us to measure impact. If you break down the learning elements into smaller chunks and say, for example, everyone who takes the pre-read can be monitored. Everyone who has that conversation with their manager is measured. Everyone who creates the learning development plan gets measured. Everyone who goes out there and makes a project gets measured. So online learning, in fact, makes it much easier for us to show impact, because by the virtue of everything now becoming digital and online, we are able to see evidence of what people have done. Yeah, that's one. I think when we couple that with some offline interventions, and I'm just reminded of this fitness app called Goki, and I'm sure there are many others out there, where all of your fitness metrics gets captured through the appliance, the watch that you're wearing, and and all of that data goes to the coach who sees, like, for example, how many hours you're sleeping, how many steps you're taking, etc., etc. And basis that, he or she then coaches you on what you need to do to be more fit. I see the future of learning coming very close to that, because uh, now with online we can see all of the data. We can become more aware of what all is happening in the learning ecosystem, and we then couple that with offline coaching and more personalized learning pathways. And together, that mixture is a very compelling one that will actually truly help people move the needle. So I would say online is actually great news in many ways. Super. I'm going to give it back to you, Satyakshi. This has been very interesting, and thank you, everyone. Again, would love to connect with you on LinkedIn and keep this conversation going. If you remember at the start, I said if one of the things you do is ask, agree or disagree, and ask more questions, I would have done my role. So thank you very much for these, and I apologize for the questions that weren't answered, but we will meet again. With that, over to you, Satyakshi.
Thank you, Nishath. I hope everyone's questions were not answered, but yes, as Nishath said, you guys can connect her on LinkedIn, and all your questions can be answered. And I hope whatever she has answered, you guys are had a lot of learnings from that. Okay. Thank you all for joining this session. We appreciate you being here. We shall be sending out the webinar recording to all you participants soon. I request you to kindly provide feedback before signing off, which will help us improve the quality of our future events. Thanks again for joining us today. Signing off on behalf of Team SpringPeople. Hope to see you again for our next Collective L&D webinar. Bye-bye.